Good afternoon, everyone. If I can have your attention, please. Today with us, we have Dr. Ghassan Khankarli, and he will be speaking to you on the freight and transportation and an integrated approach. Dr. Khankarli serves as a senior lecturer in the Department of Civil Engineering at the University of Texas at Arlington. Dr. Khankarli retired from the Texas Department of Transportation in August 2016, where he last served as the Director of Transportation, Planning and Development in Amarillo District. Dr. Khankarli is a current member of the North Central Council of Government Regional Freight Advisory Committee and a member of the TRB AV 010 and AT 050 committees. In his free time, Dr. Khankarli likes to hike and listen to classical music and attend symphonies. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Khankarli to this stage.
Thank you so much. I think when Farwa contacted me for this presentation, I was thinking, what if this was a TV show? What would my presence do to the TV rating and to the show rating? Judging by the crowd here, I guess I'm assuming I did okay. So I can only say basically thank you to the Dallas ASCE, Mr. Boyd, and your staff, and certainly Farwa and the ASCE chapter directors. And also, this is only fitting to thank all my colleagues that worked with me while I was at TxDOT, because none of my accomplishments would have been possible without members of the community and those who are in attendance, or a lot of you who are in attendance. So thank you so much, because I have never had the chance to tell you in person thank you. So this is a good time for me to mention it. So what we want to talk about is actually basically the freight and transportation based on my experience both from the planning, design, construction, and certainly maintenance. Actually, the picture that you see here, this is not it's not a wild picture. This is actually the Laredo border entry point at the International Bridge. And at the time when I visited that location, basically they were mentioning that they handle at least 12,000 transactions per day, meaning trucks in and out at the Laredo entry points. So this picture, basically as a starter, it highlights in essence the importance of freight and what it does to our engineering profession, how important this thing is. So what we want to do is go over basically a few things: Map 21, FAST Act, Freight Network, the critical urban and rural corridors, the case studies, and then where you go from here, and the questions and answers. So what I'm going to do is basically go through the overarching umbrella and then focus down to the local level on what is important, at least from a designer's standpoint. So that's what we want to do. So back in basically in 2012, on July 6, President Obama signed the Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century Act. And the key provisions on that one were basically to strengthen America's highways, establish a performance-based program, create jobs and support economic growth, support the Department of Transportation's streamline federal highway programs, and accelerate projects delivery. Now, the importance of this thing here, and the reason I'm mentioning Map 21, because the subsequent act that was passed basically relied on this one and referred to this one as far as the few requirements in that. And if you notice that there are a couple of things on this one here, is the performance measures and the creation of jobs and supporting the economic growth through transportation projects. So what we're saying here is that we're not insulating, if you will, the transportation planning and design from the policy aspect of it on what is trying to be, what is basically what is being done at the federal level. Under map 21, within the performance management section, these are the categories basically that are so important. Safety, infrastructure condition, congestion reduction, system reliability, freight movement and economic vitality, environmental sustainability, and reduced project delivery delays. So the importance on these things here is this. Anything that we do as far as design is concerned, we have to look at it from the lens from these different areas, including improvements to the safety, the infrastructure condition, which is the ability to maintain the system and keep it operational, both from a maintenance standpoint and from an operations standpoint. Obviously, those of us who live in the metro areas, we know the issue with the reduction in the congestion issues. The next two are kind of integrated, the system reliability and the freight movement and economic vitality. The system reliability, if you look at it from a perspective of shippers don't have necessarily a problem in taking them, say, an hour instead of 45 minutes to get a delivery from point A to point B. What is important to the shippers is the point that I know that it's going to take me 1 hour, and that's the reliability aspect of it. And this is why you're seeing when people start saying, say, the Amazons of the world, and they start saying, yeah, I can deliver your package in 2 hours if that order is placed by a certain time, because this is what they're talking about, is the reliability aspect of it. And of course, the freight movement and economic vitality, because the majority of the freight is moved through truck or surface transportation, meaning that we need to make sure that this is well designed, and not only from between nodes, i.e. being between major cities and major distribution centers, but also what we call the first mile and the last mile, whether you're picking up something from the intermodal facilities or the last mile, which is the delivery from to the local point, to the final destination between a warehouse and the delivery point. And of course, along the way, we have to make sure that we've got the environmental sustainability from making sure that air quality and noise quality and all that stuff. And then the reduced project delivery delays, which is making sure that everything is well timed so that we're not getting bogged down in the process. So moving forward, what happened is we have the new 5-year pretty much FAST Act, and it was signed on December 4th, 2015 to cover basically 2016 through 2020. It was like a $300 billion act, out of which $226 billion was for the highway components or transportation components to it. And the key provisions on that is basically the performance management. They're saying in that act, we're going to do pretty much what was covered in MAP 21, except that there will be now a performance measurement of earlier delivery of the projects, and also penalties for non-performance, i.e. making sure that your projects are meeting a certain performance goals. And also, they're asking, or they're saying, is employ either new tools or the Federal Highway Administration either use the existing tools or have new tools basically to make sure that we elevate and evaluate the freight movement to make it as critical as possible. Now, the importance of this stuff here is the fact that in the FAST Act, they added more funding to freight, which basically percolated down from the federal level to the state level to the local level, and that's what basically you'll see that we at the local level are working on that. So this is basically from the federal highway perspective, the National Highway Freight Network. This is pretty much limited by statute to 40,000 or 41,000 miles, and Texas accounts for about 10% of that we're, I think, if I'm not mistaken, about 3,200 miles of that. Initially, on the initial map, if you can see here, initially the I-20 corridor basically was pretty much discontinued in the original statute because it was 27,000 miles, and they had certain criteria based on truck movement and so on. And then later on, they went back and looked at the whole system. And as you can see, so you got I-10, I-20, the I-35 definitely corridor going through the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and then I-40 in the Panhandle area. Texas came back, and through when they developed the Texas freight plan, they came back with the primary networks and secondary networks. So our primary networks includes roadways. In addition to the federal highway, there are major roadways. So, for example, I can tell you that from my experience when I was in Amarillo, is the fact that 287 specifically from Fort Worth, Alliance, all the way to Amarillo and then beyond, was basically a major corridor for movements of trucks. And locally here in the NCT COG area, basically the NCT COG produced the local map basically that shows the freight network. Now, let me mention something about the NCT COG situation here. Under the FAST Act, and I will come back to this one here for a second. So under the FAST Act, there were two components to that. One is the critical urban freight corridors and the critical rural freight corridors. So those basically had to meet a certain criteria, and pretty much, in essence, basically what we're saying here is those corridors have to be pretty much considered to be meeting some of these criteria, including like connection to intermodal facilities and so on. Now, why is this important? So this one here on the critical urban and the critical rural corridors, basically, which have kind of similar things. So let me go back to the map here for a second and what NCT COG is trying to do. When because of the new act, there will be federal funding that is set aside for these urban or rural freight corridors, which means that this is very important to the cities as far as the ones that are or have facilities or have roadways or corridors that connect to an intermodal facility, or provide as an alternate route to these locations that connect to these highways that have freight movement. Why is this so important? Is because of the engineering and the design and the planning that I'm going to talk about here in a few seconds, in a few minutes. But this is basically the importance of understanding what the acts require and the funding that is available, which allows us to focus on basically the local issues that we want to focus on. And this is where basically I want to talk about. So, for example, on a corridor that has a freight movement, as you can see, so for example on this one here, is the fact that when we design roadways or reconstruct roadways, or if we're going to maintain few roadways, look what's happening here, for example, on this inlet. When you've got an 18-wheeler running next to it and we have narrow lanes of 11 foot, for example, this is what happens to those inlets. The issue here is, from a maintenance standpoint, it affects us, all of us here as taxpayers, and the residents of that respective city that has a corridor that connects to an intermodal facilities. So, for example, if you live, say, in a city like Irving or Capel or some of these places that have a lot of warehouses and they have corridors that service connections or service as connectors between key warehouses, this is what you can end up with. So a situation like this, for example, from a maintenance standpoint, is a minor adjustments to the design, i.e. making sure that you have a 12-foot lanes, for example, and maybe changing the design standard to armor this one here, or make sure that it is you have a greater offset, could help reduce the maintenance. Because on this one here, it is going to be very hard to come back and just do a patching on it without pretty much complete reconstruction of that topping of that inlet. Another example that I've seen so many times, I mean, this is just one of the pictures I was able to get here, is the fact that we don't have adequate radius on the curb return here. And the end result is when your 18-wheelers, or even not the 18-wheelers, when they're making the turn, they're tracking and they're getting into the area here where it's breaking the curb. And not only that, in some places they have irrigation systems running in those areas, or service points like water meters and stuff like that. I mean, if they are close to the vicinities in some locations. And the end result is you're not only having to fix this here, but you're having to fix all the other stuff. So from a maintenance standpoint, when we're looking at maintenance, this is one of those things that if we keep just repairing exactly what we had out there without making the necessary modification, this is added maintenance money or maintenance cost that is sunk cost. Pretty much that is costing us a lot of money and costing the local cities a lot of money by not taking that into consideration and saying, okay, now we need to do this. And by the way, one of the things that kind of people quite often kind of tend to overlook is what used to be true 10, 15 years ago may not be true today. And this is sometimes when you have changes in land development, when people go through planning and zoning and change the zoning and allow, say, light industrial, or they allow warehouses and so on. So all of a sudden, a corridor or a roadway that used to be strictly vehicular traffic, all of a sudden has become a corridor that services or basically that is frequented by trucks of all sizes, whether being single axle, or I mean double axle, or 18-wheelers, or any of that sort. So these facilities all of a sudden not only cannot handle the truck traffic, they accelerate the deterioration because the pavement was never designed for something like that. The lane widths were never designed for something like that, and certainly the curb returns were never designed like that. This is another one. This is a indicator. Again, you look at on the turnaround. This is basically, I got it from the Google Earth because it wasn't safe for me to kind of take the picture, but you can see here is the wheels of the 18-wheelers tracking and hitting the retaining wall. So sometimes, let me mention something again. I mean, you know, a lot of people sometimes get bogged down, say, if you work on TxDOT projects and then the roadway design manual says. Well, the roadway design manual is primarily as a guide, and it allows some engineering judgment. So if the roadway design manual says your minimum is 2 feet, that doesn't mean that you have to say that it's minimum 2 feet and that and I meet the requirements. The issue here is, if we know that we've got 18-wheelers here and this thing is tracking, then we need to increase that to 4 foot. Even if someone says, well, it's going to cost us a lot of money. Well, think about it. How much money is going to cost to move that retaining wall back when you're paying that much money? So maybe it may cost an extra $50,000, but life cycle cost, you're going to end up paying about $500,000 or $1 million. So stuff like that is critical. And then on top of it, on that one had like 14 foot, 9 inches clearance or something like that. So these are some of the things that I can tell you from a design, construction, and maintenance standpoint that we as designers and those who are involved in the design is take those into consideration and try to understand your traffic composition, the locations, and also try to see basically what the planning and zoning folks are trying to do, and if they're trying to change something that may affect your design. And you will have pretty much, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, if you will, a point to present to your client to say, look, I mean, this is to your advantage here if we do make some adjustments. So from a planning standpoint, moving on to my case study, this is my Amarillo project. This is one of my proudest accomplishments, along with the colleagues who helped me with the design of this thing. So you look at this facility here. This is the Hillmart cheese. The chances are that you either will buy or eat a Hillmart cheese, because they own pretty much at least 25% of the private label market in cheese, and they own, or they have a pretty good percentage, if I'm not mistaken, over 50% of the cheese market in the United States. So this company has only 2 manufacturing facilities, one in California and the other one is in Dalhart, Texas. The problem that they were facing is most of their milk comes within 30 miles, and then another, if you go 60 miles radius, they get about 70 or 80%, and 100% is within 120 miles of their facility. The problem that they're running into when they were talking about the project here in 287 on 87 in Dalhart is the connection of 385 going into Dalhart and this underpass here that is basically 13 feet 7 inches clearance, which basically every once in a while, basically almost a month, every month, we do have, at least when I was there, we have an 18-wheeler with a 40-foot container stuck under that railroad bridge. And also the farmers in that area, they can't go through here because they have to go around it because of the low clearance. The farmers that provides farm equipment, and I mean they do farming that takes it to the warehouses and stuff, they can't use this area here and that roadway. And on top of it, basically the roadway serves as the main roadway on the Ports to Plains corridor that takes you into Colorado and onto Canada. So this was basically a major project. They have been working on trying to get it going for about, at least the former mayor of Dalhart told me since the 1930s or 40s. Maybe this was a stretch. Maybe, I don't know. But all what I can say is at least 30 to 40 years. So the issue here is we were looking at doing something here to make it work. Of course, we've had a number of RVs also getting stuck in here. Now, why I'm mentioning this project, besides again being so important, remember what I mentioned when I started the conversation here with what the MAP 21 and FAST Act required. Basically, it was jobs, economic development, travel, tourism, and so on. So this project fit all of them, all of the categories that we talked about. So this is a closer look at the roadway. This is the 385 that leads into the Hillmart cheese location. And by the way, on the Hillmart cheese thing, beside they need a timely delivery of the milk so that they can do process it properly and get the cheese. Also, they have a major facility in Amarillo where they produce the cheese blocks and then send them down to Amarillo for basically processing and private labeling and all that stuff. So that connection right there is very important. But as you can see, the east-west, this is east-west pretty much. This is the main east-west railroad, UPRR railroad track, super active. And then just 500 feet to the west of that is the major BNSF north-south, basically, that takes all the freight that coming from California all the way into Dallas-Fort Worth, primarily Fort Worth Alliance. So in essence, messing up with that intersection is not an easy task and is not really feasible. So this is basically before construction. This was a 13-foot, 7-inch clear. Everybody's getting stuck underneath. And sometimes we used to see basically 18-wheelers stop, and then they will have someone kind of guide them to make sure that they cleared this one here. And this bridge, by the way, is a historic bridge that had pretty much no plans, no as-built record or no record drawings. So we had to kind of guess, if you will, where the foundation is and what to do with it. So this is the completed project. This is now in the final stages. In essence, basically, this has been dropped about to little over 2 feet to 15.7. And even during stage construction, when this thing was dropped, even the farmers that I talked to in that area were so thrilled. They didn't mind kind of getting stuck in traffic during the construction, but at least they didn't have to go through the long detour to go through it. So this is basically a case of doing the homework at the planning level and then working with the designers to design something that will work. Obviously, we had to do a lot of work, investigative work, to make sure that whatever we were trying to do, especially going under the bridge here, that it will work when you're dealing with a historic bridge and unknown foundation that you have. So where do we go from here as far as my recommendations are based on my experience with TxDOT and over the years at different locations. So number one, we need to make sure that we need to incorporate freight into our planning, design, construction, maintenance, and operation activities. As I mentioned and shown here through the case studies, is that a minor adjustments to the design will save us, all of us, a lot of money on the long-term maintenance. So when you run your life cycle cost analysis, you will see that a small investment, is very slight increase in the cost upfront, will help us very long on the long term. And not only that, remember, anytime that we're doing any maintenance, it's not an issue of just going out there and repairing something. Think about the cost of inconvenience of basically having to shut down a lane when you're going from one meeting to another meeting, and then all of a sudden you find out that the lane is closed because somebody is doing some maintenance. So there is a cost of productivity, cost of inconvenience that you have to take into consideration. Number two is the dissemination of design-related freight information to field planners, designers, construction and maintenance personnel. So for example, when you're in construction and maintenance, you need to let, say, the maintenance folks know that, hey, this corridor is a freight corridor, meaning that you can't just go down when you're doing when you're closing a lane, you can't just close it without informing, say, this warehouse or this operation. The same thing goes on construction. When you're doing traffic control plan, you can't go down to 11 foot and expect to be able to accommodate an 18-wheeler going through that area. So these are big things that need to be taken into consideration. The third one is addressing design standards shortcomings on freight routes. This is one of those things, again, the motto of this is how we've been doing it for 30 years. And my answer to that is, I'm sorry, what used to work in 30 years ago, and even what used to work 5 years ago may not work today, especially what we're about to see when we start getting into the autonomous vehicles and connected vehicles and all that stuff. So even when we start reconstructing, we have to make arrangements or provisions for all these connections and so on. So again, maybe I will dare to say that what worked a year ago may not work tomorrow. So I would say is these standards have to be changed, especially on corridors, and we have to look into a multimodal approach. I was on research team when we started back in 2010, when we looked at the connections to the airports and what needs to happen on as far as roadway design to accommodate entries to the airports and distribution systems and so on. And certainly this is true. So what we need to make sure is whatever we design accommodates a multimodal approach to that. So with that, basically all what I can say is, again, incorporating freight into your design, construction, maintenance, and even planning activities is very important and it will, as I said, it will save us a lot as taxpayers and will enable us to move to the next level, especially when we're trying to be on the forefront of technology with all what's coming with autonomous vehicles and connected vehicles. So that's all what I have to say. Thank you so much, and I will be more than happy to take any questions.